Back now to our top story, the impeachment inquiry into U.S. President Donald Trump and the quid pro quo at the heart of it. It appears Ukraine's president was ready to agree to Mr. Trump's demand to investigate his political opponents in exchange for that $400 million in military aid. The New York Times reports that in early September, President Volodymyr Zelensky was close to announcing the investigations when the White House went ahead and released the aid because Congress had started asking questions about it. Trump administration officials had even sent Ukraine drafts of a statement announcing the investigation into Joe Biden and his son. Joining me now is Global Affairs Analyst Michael Bociurkiw. He's the former spokesperson for the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe and has spent time in Ukraine. So let's talk about how this is all putting Ukraine in a tricky situation, right? President Zelensky, newly elected, on an anti-corruption platform. And then this happens. They're between a rock and a hard place. They need this money. A
very, very tough place. And don't forget, right now, they're in the midst of negotiating a historic peace agreement with Russia, with Putin. And without that even perceived backing of the United States or the White House, it's very, very difficult to do. As for the New York Times report, I do take a little bit of issue with it.
Yeah.
What I hear from a whole bunch of diplomats and other sources in Ukraine is that there was no policy.
Right.
Really, it was a policy of silence. Don't say anything to upset the White House. But now they're actually reevaluating it, as I said in my CNN Oped piece. And maybe, there's even talk in the air of maybe pushing for a joint address to Congress to show that bipartisan support. Because Zelensky in Ukraine needs to get that message out. We're not corrupt. We're here to build a peaceful and successful Ukraine.
So just so we're clear, the New York Times report suggests that Zelensky was basically on the verge of making that announcement. But your sources are saying within the Ukrainian government that that was not the case.
Correct, because the basic policy there is to not upset either party. That's always been the kind of basic Ukrainian foreign policy when it comes to the United States. But now what they're also doing, Hala, is they're also reevaluating foreign policy relations with the U.S. and maybe leaning closer towards European partners because, again, they do need strong backing from countries like France, Germany, to pressure for that peace agreement.
Now, one of the things you say in your op-ed on CNN.com is that, and you touched on this in your first answer, is that Zelensky should address the U.S. public directly, maybe even a joint session of Congress. But how would he go about doing this? He would need some support coming from Washington in order to achieve this.
Sure. I know Netanyahu has more influence in Washington.
Yes,
but
he's done that in the past.
He's done that. So if they were following that tact, I think it could happen because even Bill Taylor, Ambassador Taylor, told me is that there is that strong bipartisan support in Washington and that he would be in favor of such a thing.
But what would he achieve?
Well, two things, really. One is to get the message across that Ukraine needs strong U.S. support. Economic, military, also for getting that peace agreement, but also to put across the message that, no, we're not corrupt. Every time Trump and his circle seem to open their mouths about Ukraine, they mention the word corruption. So it's really important that they also get that across, too.
But on that phone call, he said things that maybe people who are ready to see an inclination for corruption could pick at. For instance, he mentioned staying at a Trump hotel. I mean, it seemed like he was using the type of language that, I mean, in a phone conversation with a much stronger and more powerful world leader was perhaps designed to flatter Donald Trump.
Right.
But at the same time, perhaps you know, was not the best transcript for Zelensky to have released.
I agree. And, you know, he is a former TV comedian. He is in that type of, mindset to flatter and to be funny. But he didn't come across very well. And I think the Ukrainian public have problems with that. But look, that's what most world leaders do now when they meet with President Trump. And then the other thing is, how do you go up against someone who approaches foreign policy as if it's a Atlantic City casino transaction deal? Trump is very transactional, and for someone new like Zelensky to deal with him, almost like a mafia boss, is very, very difficult. So they're learning as they go along, but I think now they're prepared to reevaluate the policy and do something like that, address before Congress, and also speak up more for Ukraine.
And you mentioned European countries and how perhaps the Ukrainian government would be wise to turn to countries. Macron, for instance, today, you saw his comments about NATO. How does that fit in? How does that?
Well, I think that Macron, with Angela Merkel retiring soon, wants to appear to be the statesperson of Europe. kind of the peace broker. So he's very, very keen on getting a deal together where Putin and Zelensky would agree to a peace deal for the east of Ukraine. But there's a long way to go. There are a lot of technicalities. So it's really important that they all get on the same page and push this deal forward, because they can't afford to wait much longer for peace to come to eastern Ukraine.
All right, and I encourage our viewers also to check out your op-ed on CNN.com. Lots of great analysis there. Thank you so much for joining us, Michael, and nice to meet you in person finally after all these years of speaking down the line over satellite.